What if you want to invest in Canada's strongest banks while earning steady dividends and growth? You won't have to spend countless hours for research and sitting in front of your computer looking for financial statements and complex charts. In this video, you will learn how to invest in Canadian bank ETFs for stable, profitable, high dividends and diversified portfolio. Canadian banks are known for stability, high dividend and long-term growth. Instead of picking individual bank stocks, you can invest in Canadian bank ETF for instant diversification. In fact, 5 of these Canadian banks have paid dividends for over 150 years, and I covered all the details in my recent video. Today, you will get a list of 6 Canadian bank ETFs focusing on 6 big Canadian banks. No leverage or covered call ETFs in this video. So now let's get started. I made this video based on recent comments made by some of our viewers. The first ETF on my list is BMO Equal Weight Banks Index ETF with the ticker symbol ZEB. It has annual distribution yield of 4.27%, management expense ratio of 0.28%. The net assets is 5.266 billion Canadian dollars, and the risk is medium to high. If you look at this strategy, basically it's an equal weight banks index ETF, and it's designed for investors looking for growth solutions. It is basically exposure to Canadian bank stocks, and they are equal weight so that the risk is reduced for each of these individual stocks and managed by BMO Global Asset Management. The inception date is October 20, 2009. Distribution is paid monthly, and as I mentioned before, the management expense ratio is 0.28%. If you look at the holdings, there are 6 banks: Bank of Montreal, TD Bank, Bank of Nova Scotia, CIBC, Royal Bank, and National Bank of Canada. The weightage, as you can see, the Bank of Montreal is 19.9, but everything else is probably about between 15 and 16%. The second ETF on my list is Hamilton Canadian Bank Equal Weight Index ETF, ticker symbol HEB. The yield is 4.23%. One of the key highlights is it has 0% management expense ratio until January 31st, 2026. It has the monthly payments. And again, as I mentioned, it has the equal weight exposure to the Canada's 6 banks. If you compare the Canadian Bank Index, it actually outperformed the TSX 60. If you look at the holdings, it is similar to the previous one, which is ZEB. Bank of Montreal has the highest weight, about 20%. The remaining 5 banks, the CIBC, the TD, the Bank of Nova Scotia, Royal Bank, and National Bank, has about 14 to 16% weight. The inception date of this ETF is April 3rd, 2023, so that's fairly new. And the investment style, as I mentioned, is equal weight, index based, and the assets is 684 million Canadian dollars. The third ETF on my list is Global X Equal Weight Canadian Banks Index ETF, ticker symbol HBNK. The distribution yield is 4.49%. They also pay monthly, which is really nice, and it has the exposure to Canada's 6 banks, and it has equal weight. The inception date of this ETF is July 5, 2023, so that's fairly new. The net assets is about 858 million Canadian dollars, and the good thing is it has a management expense ratio of 0.00%. The fourth ETF on my list is Global X Equal Weight Canadian Banks Index Corporate Class ETF with the ticker symbol HEWB. The main thing of this particular ETF is that it doesn't pay you any distribution. The main feature of this ETF is that you are not paying any income tax because there is no income from this ETF on a regular basis. It's basically looking at the total return over a period of time. And the good thing is it's basically concentrating on the more stable big 6 banks, as we discussed before: the Bank of Montreal, the Royal Bank, the TD Bank, the Nova Scotia, the CIBC, and the National Bank. If you look at the holdings, it is similar to the ETFs we discussed before. Bank of Montreal has the highest percentage. Then we have CIBC, Royal Bank, Bank of Nova Scotia, National Bank, and Toronto Dominion Bank. Fifth ETF on my list is RBC Canadian Bank Yield Index ETF. If you look at the holdings, the structure is a bit different. It has different percentage, like say for example, TD Bank and Bank of Nova Scotia, they have about 25 to 26% weight. Bank of Montreal and CIBC has about 16-17% weight, and National Bank of Canada and Royal Bank of Canada has about 8% weight. The management expense ratio is 0.32%. The inception date is October 2017, so it has been around for some time. And the distribution is 4.72, which is significantly higher than the previous ones. The sixth ETF is Hamilton Canadian Bank Mean Reversion Index ETF. The ticker symbol is HCA. The yield is the highest, 4.82%. This ETF also focuses on big six banks of Canada, but it uses a mean reversion strategy. And what is that? It rebalances the portfolio quarterly by investing 80% of the portfolio in the three banks which have recently underperformed and 20% in the three banks which have outperformed. Because of doing that, the annualized return you can see is 15.88% since inception. If you compare the performance of mean reversion versus the equal weight ETFs, you can see the difference. As we just discussed, the three banks which have the highest weightage are TD Bank, the Bank of Nova Scotia, and National Bank. And the three banks which have the lowest weight, which is 7% each, is Bank of Montreal, Royal Bank, and CIBC. The inception date for this particular ETF is June 26, 2020. And as we mentioned before, it has an annual yield of 4.82%. It pays monthly. And the risk rating is medium to high. So how to buy a Canadian Bank ETF? Number 1, open a brokerage account. Number 2, search for the ETF. Number 3, choose how many shares based on your budget and goal. And number 4, click the buy button and hold the ETF for long term. These are the 6 main bank ETFs. Next time you are faced with a situation of deciding which Canadian bank stocks you want to invest in, you can just pick one of these ETFs for instant diversification. If you do not need the distribution or dividend as your regular income, you can reinvest all the dividends for compounding your money faster for long-term wealth. Are you currently investing in any Canadian banks or Canadian bank ETFs? Which one is your favorite? Drop a comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more investing tips.